All right, the topic today is Hitler in power. So we're going to follow the major events of Hitler coming to power and then his policies, domestic and foreign, in the 1930s, leading up to the era of appeasement and coming to World War II. So we start the story in July 1932 when in the elections that were going one after another, there were a lot of elections, unstable government, Hitler's party got 37% of the vote, which means for the first time it becomes the largest party in the Reichstag, the largest single party. However, it's important to note that the Social Democrats and the Communists combined were still larger than the National Socialists, than Nazis. Now, why is that important? It is important because both of them, they were quite different in terms of, revolutionarily. The communists wanted to have a proletarian dictatorship and things like in Russia. Social Democrats were moderates. They were a traditional working class party. But still, the important thing is that both of these parties had this identity of Arbeiterklasse, which means working class identity. They had different solutions, but they were both representing a working class of Germany. And that is important, that the working class of Germany, even though they were the ones who suffered most, 6 million unemployed, they did not, in their majority, support the Hitler's party. They stayed with their party, the Communists and the Social Democrats. So that is important. However, they didn't get along, they didn't like each other, and it was also a pretty negative input of Stalin, who encouraged German communists to avoid cooperation, not to cooperate with the Social Democrats, which was one of the major reasons, in a way, that there was no united front. Speaking a little bit ahead, there was a united front in other places in Europe of socialists and communists with remarkable results. In Spain, they won and created a Spanish Republic, which was holding out for a few years against the onslaught of Franco. In France, it worked, and there was Front Populaire that was ruling France in the 1930s. So the fact that they did not cooperate was one of the reasons that contributed to Hitler's success and coming to power. Another important event is the next elections in the fall of 1930, in the fall of 32, right after that. And this is the first time when, for the first time, the number of voters for the Nazi Party declined. And that is sort of significant. They were still the largest party, but it declined. And some historians believe that maybe the peak of Nazi popularity has passed, and maybe if the Weimar Republic survived for another year or two, it could have avoided the collapse that it suffered. Whatever it may be, the crucial change that occurred in the fall of 32 is that big business decides to back Hitler. It's no longer the shopkeepers and it's no longer the unemployed, and the big business decides to do a deal with Hitler. Now, again, it's all behind the scenes negotiations and supports, but Hitler decides to become decent. It's no longer the rowdy speeches and hitting the socialists and the Jews. What are you going to do if you come to power? You have the biggest political party in Germany. Very, very pleasing to the big business. What we're going to do is reindustrialize Germany, and a lot of it would be to revise the Versailles Treaty and rebuild German industry. In other words, in popular contemporary terms, you could say Hitler promised to make Germany great again, and put people back to work. And that, of course, is a message that was very pleasing to the big business and to the unemployed, 6 million. So here's statistics. On the eve of Hitler coming to power, 33% of Germany's labor force is unemployed. 33%, like a third. This is the highest it's ever been that you could recall. I mean, it's probably even worse than in the United States at the time. So, no wonder that Chancellor, he's appointed Chancellor in January 1933 by aging President Hindenburg. The name is familiar to you. Hindenburg is the chief of Ludendorff on the Eastern Front in World War I, and then and then in 1932, he's again re-elected German president. The functions of German president basically is to appoint the Chancellor, which is the Prime Minister. So January, Hitler is appointed Chancellor. And immediately dramatic things begin to happen. The official story is that a Dutch communist set fire in the building of the Reichstag, the parliament. The unofficial story is that it was all a setup perpetrated by the Nazi Party in order to have an excuse to expel the communists from the Reichstag. And now I tend to support the latter view, that it was very convenient. And if it was just a matter to find the guilty person, you find him, you try him, you do something. He was found found guilty, executed, but immediately it was a collective action. It was not just one, but everybody, all the elected delegates, deputies to the parliament and Reichstag were expelled. And not just expelled, but put in concentration camps. And then followed the Social Democrats, who had nothing to do with it, presumably, if it was a communist who didn't get along with communists. So it was definitely a kind of a coup d'etat that Hitler perpetrated, essentially expelling opposition parties, and not just expelling, you go home and relax. No, they put them in the concentration camp that is already set up in Dachau, one of the first concentration camps to be created. The next important step is called Enabling Act. Enabling Act is a law passed by the Reichstag that enables Hitler. In other words, it gives him extraordinary powers. You can basically rule by decree. It is no longer a parliamentary republic. From the moment of Enabling Act, which is July, you have essentially a new political system, which means Germany is ruled without reference to the parliament. It becomes a dictatorship voluntarily given to Hitler by the majority in the Reichstag. And that is something that's engineered. They had a simple majority. Now, without the socialists and communists, they have an absolute majority, so they can do whatever they want. And what they do is enable their leader to become a dictator. And he begins to go by a new name. He's no longer Chancellor. He's now going to be called Führer, which means leader. So this Führer, yes, leader. Now, the next important event in the political drama that sets off, very important in change of priorities, is the so-called Night of Long Knives, which is July 1934. So basically what happens is a kind of a purge of the stormtroopers. They're called SA, and that means Sturmabteilung, which means stormtroopers. They are these brown shirts who have been basically harassing the Jews and the socialists and hitting the trade union rallies, and that was their function in the 1920s. And as I told you, they would go to their bakery, and after bakery mount on their bicycle and go hit the communists and the Jews. Now, there's a huge number of them. In 1933, there's 3 million young men who are members of the SA or SR troopers. And their leader is Mr. Röhm. Röhm is their leader, and he begins to feel very powerful. And in a way kind of stands up next to Hitler as if he's a sort of a deputy or next in line in terms of leadership. And Hitler obviously didn't like it, and then he engineered essentially a knife of murder. Röhm is murdered, and the whole leadership of the SA Abteilung, the SR troop is murdered and removed. Now, usually this is explained that there's a leadership struggle. There's much more than that. And I support the view that it was pretty much a signal from the German army to Hitler that he should not have any private armies, that the 3 million uniformed men would be much better off if they were under the command of the German army rather than some kind of a party armed forces. In a sense, this was Hitler's signal to the establishment, to the big business, and to the traditional army that that the army is going to be rebuilt and it's going to be a real army, and it's not going to have these private militias as an alternative. So basically, the SA is disbanded, and there's a birth of a new organization which has a very ominous uniform, the black uniforms with SS, which means Sicherheit, which stands for security forces. And that would become one of the, by World War II and in World War II, they will have SS divisions. They would be guarding the camps. It would grow and grow and grow. It would become one of the major features of Nazi Germany is the powerful black uniformed SS with a skull in their uniform attributes.